Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, where today we are going to be discussing issues to do with information communication technologies. And Economic Forum is a program that discusses various economic issues affecting our country, Zimbabwe. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so on the numbers that are appearing on your screens. And I have the pleasure today of welcoming Dumisani NKALA, who is a digital transformation strategist.
That's right, John.
Yes. Welcome, Dumisani.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Nowadays, there's this adage which says, life is digital. What does it mean?
John, that's very true. Life is indeed digital in the 21st century. I'll give you just 3 examples of how digital life has become in the 21st century. When I was growing up, we would be given a small silver coin to run to the shops to go and buy a loaf of bread. Nowadays, I can walk into the shops with just this device over here, transfer some invisible money to the shop, and they let me walk out with a loaf of bread.
Yes.
That's one example of how digital life has become. Second example, when I was starting my career in the early 2000s, I used to drive or commute across town more than 45, maybe 15 minutes to get to the industrial area in order to get to work. Nowadays, getting to work is as simple as getting out of bed, walking a few steps to my dining room table, and that's where my workplace is. You will realize that since 2020, a lot of businesses are now allowing their staff to work from home because of the COVID outbreak and because of they having to do some stay-at-home work. So the office is now literally a computer and a dining room table. Third example, perhaps, of how digital our life has become is when we were growing up, when we were much younger. In order to watch entertainment, we would have to wait until 5 p.m. in the afternoon for TV to start. And it used to have that round signal, and we would wait eagerly for TV to start, and of course it would end by 10 p.m. Nowadays, entertainment is as simple as picking up an iPad, or once again, a phone, and being able to tune to whatever news that one wants to watch, various programs, applications that allow you to get your content on demand. So literally, life has become almost entirely digital.
Listening to you very carefully, when we were doing this, when we were still young, I was imagining Dumisani NKALA somewhere in Harare or in Bulawayo, and I could not get that sense of Dumisani NKALA in Kodlwayo or somewhere in Nkai, So is it fair to say life is digital to everyone?
There are areas in our country, areas in our communities where people do not have access to the digital and where life for them is not yet digital. And unfortunately, what that does is it sidelines them from economic activity in particular, from education very specifically. And so quite right that you say that life is digital, maybe for more urbanized populations rather than for more rural and outlying populations.
But it's getting there.
It's getting there. So there's a couple of things that need to happen for it to get there, and I'm assuming that that's part of what we'll talk about today.
Discussing.
Yes.
Let me just get an extract from the national strategy of Zimbabwe about ICTs. I'm going to read you this strategy, and you're going to unpack it as an industry player, how you understand it and what progress we are making. Just an extract from the strategy. ICTs are key enablers of economic development. Hence, their entrenchment across all national development strategies for universal access to be attained by 2030 is indispensable. And 2030, I would say, is around the corner.
It is literally around the corner. As you know, the years fly very, very fast. And so maybe my comment on that extract that you just read is that I think government has done a good job of putting in place certain policies. I think we've got a raft of policies that have been promulgated in the last maybe 7 to 10 years, specifically the Cybersecurity Act, the Infrastructure Sharing Act. There are a raft of statutory instruments that have been introduced to try to make ICT more accessible, ICT businesses more accessible, ICT licensing more accessible. So the policy
is this as a result of your interventions?
I think a part of it is that as industry and as the regulator, the Postal and Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe, POTRAZ, works very closely with industry on consultations around what needs to be happening, and they've listened very closely as players have made comments around these things. POTRAZ is the telecommunications regulator. I think there's also a broadcasting regulator as well, and even the financial services regulator have been listening very closely to issues that concern ICT and ICT players. And so there's been a raft of policies, but policy is only the beginning. It cannot do the entire job. Policy sets the framework. Policy sets the environment. But there's other things that we need to consider when we now want to go further, and that we would wish we can accelerate both as industry and government hand in hand as we head towards 2030.
To some of those things,
okay.
Just a few before we go for a break.
Let me talk about just mention three of them very briefly. Firstly, education and learning needs to start very early in life around these digital technologies. And this is part of what you refer to when you say that some people are excluded out of this because they don't have access to the learnings that are required in order for them to become full digital citizens. Secondly, skills development. Skills development is slightly different from education in the sense that you need to be immersed in an environment where you're given the skills, where you're given the know-how about how to actually operate these ICTs. Then the third and last thing that I would say is creating the jobs and the industries that can absorb these young people that are gaining these skills. And so I think very briefly, those are the three things that I would say still need a lot more implementation. While the policies are there, the implementation, I think, still needs to be done in a more comprehensive manner.
To me, you mentioned very critical areas there. For instance, that gadget which you have in front of you, the phone. As far as I'm concerned, I think I'm only using a small percentage, but I can see children using so many, part of that phone, so many applications from that phone, and I find myself illiterate in that manner. So that's one thing you also want to mention, that digital literacy, in the training and so forth, is very critical.
It is very critical. I mean, we talk about nowadays that we've got digital natives. These are the children who are born into an era where it seems as though even from 3 months old, they know how to swipe, the swipe generation.
For now, we're going to take a short break and join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. Welcome back to the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing ICTs and their role in business and economic development. And as Dumisani NKALA here, my guest has said, life is digital, and she illustrated by use of several examples. But then when we ended the first segment, we were just explaining about children and how they've mastered the digital skills right from an early age. You called them
digital natives.
Tell us.
So we're calling them digital natives. They're called digital natives, and these are the children that are born and cultured in an environment where technology is all around them. So it almost seems as though they've got these skills, these literacy skills right from birth. However, we do understand that it's not an automatic thing. Children need to be exposed and in an environment where they can get this kind of literacy. And so clearly there are children who don't have access to this kind of literacy. And so this literacy is very important. When you look at some of the UN development goals, sustainable development goals, part of the development goals speak to the fact that we need to expose all communities, all children to this kind of education and literacy. But also, it's not just the children. In fact, the children may be the least of our worries. The industry leaders need to be literate themselves. You mentioned that, as an older person, you're using the device only for maybe 10% of what it can do. And this is, again, the literacy that we need to introduce at industry level, at executive level, at professional level, is to make sure that industry leaders also understand what this ICT can do for them as an industry, for their homes, and for various sectors of the economy.
You mentioned a very important point because the national strategy again observes or notes challenges related to underutilization of ICTs in service delivery, particularly e-government. And I think some of the points that you have raised point to that. Probably you want to elaborate?
Sure. I think part of us becoming a more digital nation and a more to deliver on those strategic goals is the effective utilization of technology. Now, technology in and of itself is not an end in itself. It's an enabler. So when we talk about e-government or e-services, or services that are delivered digitally, we're really talking about utilizing technology to deliver the same services that have always been being delivered, but in a more efficient and in a more effective way. Unfortunately, you find that a lot of our departments are still struggling a little bit to adapt to this, and a lot of it is not because the technology is not available. I think government in many cases has made good technology available to the departments. I think the gap, in my view, lies in educating and making literate the teams that actually have to deliver the services and making them comfortable to use the technology that they're supposed to use to deliver the services.
Maybe as a player, your experiences in business during COVID-19, where you really felt that this lack of knowledge or this deficit in ICT literacy has really drawn back some of the businesses. Had they known, they would be better off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of examples that one can cite where COVID exposed the fact that maybe we have not adapted as quickly and as effectively as we should have to the digital era. So you'll find that many businesses, when hit by the lockdowns, were unable to deliver things as simple as bills, invoices, statements to their customers because they were not utilizing systems that could effectively send those bills and invoices to customers on digital devices. They were still used to manual processes. And of course, what that did is it impacted their revenue collection. So that's one very simple example. Even the delivery of certain call center services that we're used to, I'm sure many of us experienced it, where interactions with our favorite service providers were curtailed, whether it's banking service providers or various other service providers. We could not effectively communicate with them, even tax authorities. It was a little bit more challenging to communicate with them and keep business going because a lot of them had not yet adapted or adopted ways of doing business that fit into the digital era.
Do you think right now industry and commerce are so fully educated about how to use these ICTs for all their business activities, or there's still a long road to travel?
I think there's still a long road to travel, John. And a part of the challenge is that a lot of the systems and solutions that have been developed in a context that is different from our African context. You will appreciate that while technology maybe is ubiquitous, it's similar and the same, but the way that it can be applied to different situations certainly depends on the context within which it's being applied. And so there's a big need for adaptation of technologies and systems for the local African context, for the local Zimbabwean context, because even Zimbabwe is different from its other African neighbors. And so I think there's a need for engagement in sort of an engagement between government, industries, and businesses themselves and small businesses to really talk about what it's going to take for us to adapt these technologies for our own local utilization.
We keep on going back to the grassroots, Domi. Do you think they are also in line with the whole nation, or are only talking about industries as they are found in big cities? Do you also think that people out there in the rural areas have managed also to catch up using these small ICTs, be that they are not yet well penetrated?
I think when we talk about maybe grassroots, maybe I would want to refer to two types of grassroots. The one is your very informalized businesses in an urban setting, because they have a very different context than maybe your more formalized industries. And you'd be surprised at how effectively these small informal players are using technology, you will find that WhatsApp has become a very effective business tool, believe it or not, in that very informal sector. So that's the one side. Then in your more ruralized context, what's crippling our rural brothers and sisters is access to connectivity. It's growing slowly but surely. However, I think we still have a little way to go to make sure that there's connectivity ubiquitously all over Zimbabwe, including in the most remote areas.
Yes. To me, we'll take another break, and when we come back into the third and final segment, we shall look at issues like e-business and e-commerce. Join us then. Welcome to the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing all matters ICTs, information, communication technologies, and we have an industry player here, NKALA, who is a digital transformation strategist. And to me, in this segment, we would want you to go straight into what is meant by e-commerce, e-business. Are they not one and the same thing? Because as we talk about ICTs in the economy and in business, those are very important to understand.
Right. So, John, when you talk about e-anything, it's a subset of one group of things. So, e-business, e-commerce, e-government services, anything e usually is referring to the digitization of a particular subsection of industry or digitization of a set of processes. So when people talk about e-commerce specifically, they're usually talking about the issue of transacting electronically, the issue of transacting digitally. When people talk about e-business, they're now talking about the entire set of processes that are involved in business being digitized or being put on some kind of electronic network. And of course, you'll appreciate that e-commerce is one section of e-business, but there are many other things, there are many other processes that businesses run that have to be digitized as well. So those would be the slight distinctions between e-commerce and e-business, but they're a subset of a similar set of...
Maybe examples will help.
Okay, so when you go to the supermarket and you transact using your mobile money wallet, that we call that an e-commerce transaction. In e-business, there are many business processes that we want to make more efficient and more effective. For example, the process of selling to customers, the process of communicating with customers, sending them their documentation, even the process of getting customers to sign contracts can all be done electronically, and that is all part of what we call e-business. Even our stock keeping can all be digitized in one way or another, and so all of that suite of processes and activities can be termed under e-business.
Are these courses or these subjects now being incorporated into our curricula so that we move with the times? Because as you said, that some of the old guard really struggle with some of these things.
These subjects and these issues are definitely coming into the curricula, especially at a tertiary level. My challenge for my fellow educators and fellows in the industry is that these things need to come in a lot earlier than tertiary education. At some point, tertiary education might be a little bit late. We need to start introducing these subjects even at primary school. And allowing the
and at home
content and at home, that's right, and at home, starting it quite early.
Because the parents do get cross when they find children on the on their devices. But as you are saying, that it's important to actually teach them and also discipline them on how to use them. But otherwise, the knowledge that they're getting there is very, very valuable.
In fact, that's very true. In fact, there's something called digital citizenship, which we need to teach each and every citizen of the country. But anyone who interacts on a digital platform needs to be taught digital citizenship, which are the rules and the norms, really, of how you conduct yourself safely and securely and in a legal manner online.
The other thing that I've observed to me is that some of the things that you may have sold in the past, you'd find them very difficult to sell today, because already they will be circulating on WhatsApp and other platforms. And how do we make sure, how are we careful to make sure that we monetize some of these things? For instance, you may be an author, and you were publishing books and they were being bought at bookshops and so forth. But soon after publication, it's there on PDF and people are reading it, and there's no need to buy that book. How are you, dealing with that so that monetization does not get lost?
In fact, that's probably the core of what digital strategists tend to do, is to try and find ways of shaping new business models, new commercialization models, which are maybe different from when we were in the analog world, where books could be sold physically and so on. So you'll probably find that a lot of the new business models are involved with a different kind of monetization, where before you could sell the book itself, now you are looking to sell perhaps ancillary services instead of the book itself. So you're looking to monetize by taking your IP and making it into a course, and you can monetize the course, or taking your IP and going out on the circuit and speaking in different fora and monetize those events. So the business models are
Is this
new.
being understood by the artists, the writers, maybe just next to you, your mom who is a writer? Is this something that they understand and they're already implementing?
Artists in the first world are doing a little bit better than we are locally. But again, it's an issue of education and exposure. There are some that are starting to understand it, and especially since we've got a big diaspora, I think you'll find that a lot of writers are now putting their books on Amazon and so on, so that the diaspora can consume them. So I think it's slowly coming there. It's slowly coming.
To me, in conclusion, let's revisit the marginalized. We were just mentioning them in bits and pieces. Really, are we really including them in these processes?
Let me mention two things that are being done, probably at a national level and at a government level, and industry is involved as well with these two things. The one is we've got what's called the Universal Services Fund, which is put together by and administered by the industry regulator, POTRAS, and that fund is funded by the license contributions of many players in the industry, and that fund is used specifically for the rollout of network to disadvantaged areas. And so you'll find that there's a strong acceleration in that area in terms of taking connectivity, because connectivity is where it starts. If there's no connectivity, then people can't participate. Then the second thing is issues around addressing power, because remember, these things are electronic devices. They need to be powered. And so if there's no power in the remote areas, once again, and so the move towards solar energy is a big movement in trying to address this gap. Then the last thing that I'll talk about is now supplying the devices and the education and literacy that we talked about earlier, which allow for the children, the community, the villages, and so on to engage with the rest of the world using these devices. So I think with those three initiatives, that's what's going to get us to where we want to go.
Well, to me, we can go on and on, but I think for today, you've given us enough information about what's happening in the world of information, communication, technologies. I would like to thank you for that.
Thank you, John.
That was Dumisani NKALA, who is a digital transformation strategist, who was our guest today on Economic Forum. And if you would like to get in touch with us at Economic Forum, you can dial those numbers which are appearing on your screen. So until next time, this is John Masu.